With great promise and expectation can also come great disappointment. It's fair to say that for many, when Baldo released, there were so many issues that hindered their enjoyment, and the similarities to the game No Man's Sky, which came with such a wave of hype, were evident. Whatever it did, it was always going to disappoint someone. But beyond this, I could also see the potential. It has incredible artistic direction. There were 100 tweaks I could point out that would improve the overall gameplay, and I made it known by creating a video called What Went Wrong with Baldo. Now, since that release, I've actually been in contact with the developers because I've been back to Baldo and it's changed in significant ways. As you know, we run an all patched up series, so around about 3 or 4 months ago, I contacted the two developers and asked them if they'd be interested in essentially sponsoring me to go back, so to take the time to go back, play through the game as well as the new expansion, and then feed back to everyone. Now, understandably, it was a little bit tense at times because I'd essentially torn the game to pieces for the multitude of errors that I found. But respect where it's due, I could see these guys were dedicated to improving the experience, and they took on board a list of bugs and issues that I'd had, and that brings us to this video. I tongue-in-cheek referred to it as the resurrection of Baldo, but you know what? It might just be that. The game's not perfect still, but for two developers to have created and then listened to that kind of feedback and improved, as I've said previously, it just deserves respect, it deserves attention. So I'll go over everything and you can make your own mind up. I guess that then leaves the question, is this the resurrection of Baldo? Well, let's find out. It makes sense to directly take the issues I had from my other video and then see what they've done to change them. Then we'll go into the new features of the game, the overall performance, and what you can expect from that brand new free expansion. Before I say anything else, the game is currently on sale. And again, it's another thing where I said to them, look, if we're going to do this video, put it on sale, because you're giving more people the opportunity to find out for themselves. Alright then, first up was the saving system. When it first came out, Baldo had a very unusual save mechanic. It was sporadic when it happened, and you could play for a few hours, forget to manually save, go away from your Switch, come back, and find that your save was gone. When I was dying repeatedly through numerous other things that we'll go into, it was the icing on an already quite frustrating cake. But the saving is now much more frequent. The game saves with each room that you enter, and it will also autosave if you do decide to quit out and go and play something else. Totally standard on every game, but it wasn't there, and it is now. So that's one big tick. Next up, I had issues with the stamina wheel. Here's what I had to say about that. If you are going to have key elements on screen, you need to make them legible. The first of these is the stamina wheel, which is over there, and you just can't really see it. As you can see, they took that on board and they've moved it above Baldo, making it much easier, without even thinking, to just know if you've got enough stamina to keep running or not. A very small tweak, but one that makes a significant difference once again to the enjoyment, as you're not constantly running out and then just shuffling along for a while. They've also increased the amount of stamina you get so it doesn't run out as quickly, plus they buffed the impact of potions and fruits so that it increases this much more. Probably one of the biggest issues I had with the game was the terrible mapping system. You simply didn't know where you were half the time. This, I know for a fact, was probably one of the most difficult changes to implement. They completely rewrote the code to allow for the exact position of the player, as well as providing what I was begging for, which is a direct orientation on the map so you know which way you're facing. Inside dungeons, it was equally difficult to navigate, but it now shows which door you came in through, and it also shows all of the different connections. As well as this, you can switch between the floors and have a look at where you potentially need to go. The overworld map includes 1-for-1 scale streets and paths, as well as the names of different places, the main non-player characters, and pinpoints, so you actually know where to go. All of these things just weren't there at launch, and it's funny because I had a bit of a Barney with someone in the comments yesterday that was like, the game hasn't received any patches. And I said, I'm sorry, that's just not the case. It's just not true. It's an entirely different experience. And we're only up to about 0.2 of about 15. So let's carry on. Another bugbear I had in my video was the fast travel system. There just weren't enough fast travel points. It essentially made it redundant and a little bit annoying to have fast travel when you couldn't go where you wanted to go. In light of that, they've added in a load of new fast travel points, including dungeons to fast travel to, and that covers almost the entirety of the game. As well as this, they've highlighted the most important NPCs. If you've played the game, you know what I'm talking about. The map seller, Minicio. I respected the idea of having you try and naturally follow the red mushrooms, but in practicality it just was a bit annoying. Now this comes with the new assist mode, but that's another huge change that we'll go into in a minute. That guy in the comments, he won't like that because he will feel like he's wrong, and we don't like those keyboard warriors to get upset. A minor change, and not one that I really considered when the game came out, honestly. I mean, I might have moaned about it, but I can't really remember. Things like the bushes and the soil where you can dig to get different items, like healing items and things like that. If you die within the area, those now respawn as well, so that you can actually get those healing items again, which is really useful. Again, you were on a constantly downward spiral of difficulty when it first came out. If you've ever walked out of your front door, taken that first step down to the road and perished, well then you'll know how I felt when I first played Baldo. You would drop 2 feet to an area that you could access via walking. Here's what I had to say about that one. Certain aspects of the way you move are really annoying. There's the drop death, which is so badly implemented. Well, it turns out that the developers also agree that that might not be the most fun and enjoyable thing. Now, in the areas where you will drop to your death, there is no more instant game over screen. You'll just respawn, potentially taking a small amount of damage. In a dungeon, you'll just respawn from the nearest door. It's standard 101 in gaming, and it just makes it so much more accessible. You can still fall and die from ridiculous heights, but it's what you would expect, and I'm okay with that. There's no doubt that when I made my video, I was quite salty about the game because of the amount of disappointment I felt, and maybe I included a few things that were wishful thinking, but I remember pointing out that there's one area near the start where rather than let you just walk through, there's like a bush there. It makes you go all the way around and walk through the water, and the water speed, the movement was so unbelievably slow. It felt like the developer was basically punishing you. And weirdly, they actually patched in the movement speed through water is quite significantly increased. And it does exactly what it says on the tin. It avoids useless frustration. So we've got improved saving, we've got a better stamina wheel, we've got a much improved map, we've got improved fast travel, improved bushes, believe it or not, and you no longer drop and die every 5 seconds. Oh, and you can walk faster in water. And then we had issues with text size. At launch, it just wasn't large enough, particularly if you were playing on a Switch Lite or even a Switch OLED. It's a text-heavy experience. It's one where you'll have to read quite often, and it wasn't ideal. The big improvement here is the increased text size, but also the possibility to zoom in when playing in handheld mode. Thank you very much. If only every game had a text size option, or at least some accessibility options to make it easier. I know there's the system-wide magnification you can do, but come on. On a console that is handheld, you really want the developers to be thinking about how their players are going to consume that content. So a text size increase is most appreciated. It's actually really quite unusual for me going through these changes because, you know, if you've watched the channel for more than 5 minutes, you know that it's just Glen and I. We're not a big corporation. We don't hold ourselves above anyone else. We just do something that we enjoy. So going through this list of changes, and it's literally just based on me moaning, like just me griping about a game that I wanted to love. It's pretty humbling. Honestly, it's yeah, and I know that it's just 2 blokes, and I know the amount of time this must have taken just to do these changes. So I just got all the time in the world for that. The next one is the audio. So I had said something along the lines of when the dialogue boxes pop up, it's just silence. And if you've ever played a Nintendo game, they have a beautiful habit of using a little like a sound effect. It's not in any language, but it just adds to that speech. It fills the silence in a way. And they've added that in, which I know, you know, it's not a huge thing. Yeah, I just think that's incredible. At launch, load times were a bit too long, and that's putting it quite nicely. Some areas were significantly too long. That's been worked on, the coding's been improved, and the load times are better than they were. There are still some areas where it takes a little bit too long for my liking, but it's significantly better than it was at launch. One area that hasn't changed is I mentioned that it might be easier, well not easier, but it might make life easier if you could rotate the camera at certain times. But this is intrinsically an isometric experience, and I'm told that the work that would have to go into creating a rotating camera, you would essentially have to redo a lot of the puzzles, redo some of the artwork, etc. So unfortunately that's one thing that hasn't been implemented, but you do have the little shadow that shows you when you're behind objects, etc. So there is that. Another massive area of improvement, or one that needed massive improvement in my opinion, was the combat. Here are some of my original thoughts. Next up we have combat. I know combat's an area that many of us have struggled massively with, and it's not struggled in the Dark Souls sense of the word, where you're learning the attack patterns of the enemies, gradually figuring it out and countering in all the right ways. This is struggling in the sense that the enemies lock onto you and then can kill you with a single move. With that in mind then, Baldo now moves a step forward with each sword swing. It makes a massive difference. It really does. You can perform a few swings and you're getting closer and you'll start to make impact rather than before it stood completely still. And look, I know things like Breath of the Wild, you stand still on the spot, but the overall combat design is very different there. And that's in conjunction with the fact that there are no more one-hit kills. Who wants a one-hit kill in a game that looks like this? It's like, la-di-da, having a nice little stroll in the forest. Oh look, there's a dangerous looking frog. And then he just one-shots you and you're like, no, leave me alone. Well, that doesn't happen anymore. And if I'm honest, that's probably one of, combine that with the falling off of low heights and dying instantly, that's one of the things that really got my goat. So that's improved. There was another thing that I spoke about, which was that enemies locked onto you. So it was obviously, I don't know why it was there, but they used to track the player at all times. So when you did a roll to get out of the way, they would track your roll and still hit you. And it was like, what the hell? I'm gonna die with one hit anyway. At least let me roll out the way. But now you can just roll through, you can roll to the side, you can easily escape those attacks. And they seem to be just a little bit less aggressive in general, which is a nice touch. Again, it was just OP. You'd be like happily like puzzle solving, and then a vine would just insta-whip you to death. And that's not to say that you couldn't defeat the enemies originally. Each one did have a way to beat them, but it was so specific, in my opinion, that it was more frustrating than fun. Now you feel like you can actually adapt to enemies on the fly, and it just feels more fair. I know that the devs envisaged you learning those attack patterns and learning each of those characters, and they compared it to games like Breath of the Wild or Elden Ring, but small things like the tracking of your every movement so that you can't evade, that's not in any of those games, and that's a fundamental thing that makes it frustrating. And now that that's been improved, it's just more enjoyable. It still has the element that you have to deal with enemies in certain ways, but it doesn't feel unfair. I wonder if that guy that told me the game hasn't had any patches is still watching. I hope so. Hi. Let's talk then about completely new additional modes that the game's had. First, they added in HUD tutorial instructions. It's optional, you can switch it on in the menus, and it essentially just gives you standard prompts for button presses, etc. Things that in the early hours of the game you might forget. A nice little touch, but even nicer is the assisted mode. Again, it's a toggle, you can activate it or deactivate it in the options. And overall it makes the experience much easier in a number of ways. It adds a load of extra waypoints onto the map, which takes a little bit of the exploratory design away from the game, but if you haven't got all the time in the world to just go wandering around to find the next area, you may find it a little more enjoyable. And that obviously includes the map seller, which I mentioned before. This assisted mode also introduced a heart recovery system, which essentially means that if you get hit, you don't instantly lose that heart, it flashes for a while, and if you don't then get hit again, that heart will automatically recover. You can, of course, still recover this by eating fruits or drinking potions, but it's a nice little touch. Okay, so those are the main changes of the game. We'll go then into the free DLC, the brand new story expansion, and then I asked the developers some questions about the original intent of the game and kind of their thoughts now, so we'll do that at the end. So with everything going on and improving all of these bugs and doing all these other things, they had the idea of introducing a brand new free story mode, essentially, that was there to thank the 300,000 people that had worked their way through the game, bugs and all, and found some real enjoyment there. It's also quite a nice introduction if you're a new player. It's a little bit easier. This is around about a 7-hour story, and it's an introduction to the world and its mechanics. It has 3 smaller dungeons in it, and you can actually do the first 2 of those in any order you choose, with the final dungeon being quite a bit more tricky. So in total, you're looking at around about 60 to 70 hour long experience now. Here's what the developers had to say about the game's original reception. There was a common misconception about Baldo. Maybe if it was released today after Tunic and Elden Ring, people would approach it in a different way, who knows. At that time, people thought it would be a quite chill adventure due to its Ghibli-like cute look. But truth is, Baldo was a complex exploring adventure that had the intent to give players the experience to jump into an unknown complex world, giving the joy to explore and dive deeper and deeper into its huge world. When I said in an interview that Baldo's inspiration was Monkey Island, it was because Baldo is a puzzle adventure game that wants the player to always take a look around for clues and in the environments where you'll find all the tips and solutions hidden, such as the signs on the wall or the ground in the prison to solve the main puzzle, for example. Baldo doesn't aim to take the player by the hand, a reflection of the real world, and the areas are designed as mazes on purpose, similar to things like Tunic or Death's Door, because it wants you to explore and uncover step by step the vast world for yourself. Learn the environments, discover new areas, clues, hidden temples, open new side quests, interact with new NPCs, and learn the deep net of connections that stand beneath the surface. It's much more Zelda Link to the Past or Zelda 1. Baldo's dungeons were built in the old school Zelda series style, which means that I worked quite hard to make them branching paths with multi-level puzzle solving. I could have made them more linear, and in honesty, that would have been much easier, but the challenge was intentional, and I'll post his full statement down in the description. It's interesting that when you go over to Steam now, the original reviews were mostly negative, and then it's moved over time, and now it's mostly positive because new players are experiencing the game, well, the way it is now. As I said at the start, I think it's really important that if a developer, especially just a two-man team, spends the time and goes back and tries to make as many improvements as they possibly can, then, you know, we're going to talk about it. I'll let you decide if you agree with the guy in the comments the other day that said the game hasn't had any updates, or if potentially we've proved that there have been some updates and you want to check it out. As I say, it is on sale at the moment. All the details of that sale are on the screen right now. So if you want to support those developers and you want to try the game out, go and give it a whirl. Thanks to both of them for letting me do this video and for actually listening to the community. It's a very rare thing, and I'd say that potentially smaller and indie style things like this channel and like them tend to try and do that more than the big corporate peoples. So yeah. Nice one. So all of you, if you enjoy the content, if you want to leave a comment down below, if you want to let the developers know anything, or there's maybe a couple of things you still want to improve, or whatever you want to say, leave it down there, because I guarantee you these guys will be reading all of them. I'll pop all the links and everything in the description. And just as always, a thanks to all of you and to our patrons who support us each and every month. And for all things Switch, all the time, keep it Switch up. Cheers, guys. See ya!